I'm kind of a wannabe architect who had the great good fortune to discover early on that I really stink at architectural design, and just managed to find myself being a structural engineer, which put me in the greatest place to work on with more architects on more beautiful buildings than I ever would have dreamed of if I'd become an architect.
Yeah.
It's just like I hit it out of the park.
Hi. Hello.
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 Hello, and welcome to Architecting.
Hey, welcome to Architecting. I'm Rebecca Wagner, here with the host, Adam. Hey, Adam, who's on the podcast today?
Hey, today we have some heavy hitters. We got some big guys. We got some interesting fellows on. We have Greg Kingsley and Brant Lahnert of KL&A Engineers and Builders.
Nice, some structural engineers.
I know. Have you worked with KL&A before?
No, not personally.
I mean, I've worked with them a few times, but not with Greg or Brant. But from that and from just kind of general reputations, it seems like they're really one of the top shelf structural engineers in the state, I'd say. And what do you think? There's nothing better than when you're working with a good, open-minded, design-focused structural engineers as collaborators, right?
Yeah, they can make it fun.
Yeah, really have the possibility to really expand the architecture. And these are those guys, I think, very similar to Chris and Julian at Studio NYL, who we've interviewed before. Just structural engineers who are really interested in design and architects, and just fun guys to be around. So I heard they listened to the show and was honored that they took me up on my invite to have them on. And this is the first time that I'd met them before. And this is a very long episode, but we could have talked much longer. They've just got some great stories working with a lot of fantastic architects. In fact, we were met inside of a Lake Flato building that they worked on DU's campus, all mass timber.
Nice.
Yeah, but just very open and funny and informative. And had a great time.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, like I said, it's a long interview, but we had a bunch of bonus stuff that we talked about, and we kind of all cut it together and put it in after the credits. But yeah, check it out. And I feel sort of bad to these guys as well. Like we recorded this interview almost 3 months ago, and I'm just now getting it out, and it was supposed to go out, and what got in the way?
The holidays, life, 2 kids, a job.
Yeah. It still just stressed me out that I wasn't getting this out.
It's okay. No one's waited with bated breath for this.
We're gonna get so many emails saying you're wrong. It's so dumb. I think, everybody's checking their podcast inbox, their feed every Wednesday, waiting for this to hit. But I know that's not true. So I think it's just a good lesson in, especially within architecture, how easy it is to get ramped up and get stressed, and obviously there's deadlines that we have to hit, but in learning how to judge what's important or necessary versus what is okay, and how to live life with
what's enough. What's sufficient, what's priorities.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah. So anyway, this is really late. Sorry, Greg and Brant, but here it is. I'm excited to get it out in the world. Enjoy.
But first, here's a few messages from our sponsors.
Hey, we're happy to be sponsored by Modern in Denver magazine. For over a decade, they've been crafting fantastically curated content on Colorado designers and projects, spreading the gospel of good design within our region.
And I love how the goal of Modern in Denver aligns with the goal of this podcast, to better build up and connect the community of Colorado designers. So go buy a copy of the magazine at your local bookstand, subscribe to their weekly email list, and follow them on Instagram.
Check it out. And now, back to the show.
So where are we at? What building are we at?
This is the Burwell Center for Career Achievement, if I've got that right.
Yeah. Lake Flato.
Lake Flato was the design architect. Ryan Yaden was the lead, and then the local architect was Shears Ekins Rockmore.
Okay, yeah.
Dan Craig worked with us.
Oh yeah. I always like saying his name. Like it sounds like I know somebody really famous. Like oh yeah, Dan Craig. I worked with Daniel Craig on this, and I was like on an AIA committee with him, and he would always just call in, and his Zoom always said Daniel Craig on it, and it wasn't even Dan Craig, but yeah, he's a good guy. So when did you start? When did you start this one?
Well, I mean, it was actually moved along pretty well. I think we started it somewhere in 2017 range, so about a year of design and a couple of years of construction.
Have you worked with Lake Flato much?
Yeah. We've done a handful of projects at Lake Flato. We really aligned with those guys.
Yeah,
they're
probably hard not to, right?
Yeah.
They're phenomenal.
They're
Their
phenomenal.
work is really good, I think.
There's a guy we've done a lot of work with, Carney Logan Burke up in Jackson Hole, and one of their guys, Brian Como, moved to Texas and joined up with Lake Flato, and he sort of was our door, our invitation to the door, and so we've got a few different connections there now. So we have a handful going right now. Is
this a full wood structure? Yeah.
Yeah. Everything in here is 100% timber structure.
Mass timber
structure. Yeah.
Nice.
Beams seem a little large. Just saying.
From a structural engineer. Wow, I never heard that before. Yeah.
He's
Look
trying.
how tight the column spacing is. Your column spacing is really, really tight.
He's trying to get a rise out of me.
It looks nicely structured. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Adam.
That's funny.
Actually, this is sort of our second. I don't know. We've done a couple of dozen mass timber buildings at this point, but the biggest ones locally are Plat 15 and this one, and then a place called the Boulder Loading Dock that we call Boulder Loading Dock in Boulder, that a tech company occupies. Those are sort of the biggest commercial ones, and we have various and sundry different ones. But this was an important one for us on the campus, and they love it. They really love it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it just from the exterior, especially, it does a good job of kind of merging the old styles with something sort of different and new. And then, just the working environment in here seems nice. But I haven't spent much time on this campus. But my sister almost went to law school here last year, and we were pushing really hard and got to tour the campus. And then she went to Rhode Island instead and last out on that babysitter. And on my sister. I love you, sis. Yeah. But yeah, so the building on Platt Street is by Oz, and then who designed
the Boulder one is also Oz.
Oh, okay.
Same group.
Yeah.
It was actually the same developer as well, right?
Oh, nice.
They kind of practiced on the Boulder building to see if they liked this mass timber thing, and totally worked for them. And so they did that one, and then they're also working with us, and they got the band back together to do another one that's nearby. I don't know what I'm allowed to talk about or not, but let's just say it worked out for them. So.
You can say anything. We'll cut it out, I promise. Right.
We were discussing with our kind of DEI group about whether Greg could drop the F-bomb here, and this one. They're like, well, either way, it's okay, because if he does, then he feels edgy, and if he doesn't, he looks professional.
Exactly. You
can't go wrong.
Yeah, but are you relatable or are you professional?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A little bit of both.
And do you get that explicit sticker slapped on there?
Get more listeners.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's continue that with making you answer a question of who are you? Did you practice that?
You go first.
That horrible question.
That is a horrible question, actually, because my first answer was that I'm just a sack of biological material on a ball of dirt, flying around a fiery ball running away from the center of the universe, right?
Yeah, I like it.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
But ultimately, I came down to that I work, I build buildings, I raise a family, and I play tennis a lot. That's pretty much sums me up in a nutshell.
Nice.
For me, I always think, I did think about, I'm a big fan of your podcast, so I've heard everybody struggle with this question. My answer is really that I'm kind of a wannabe architect who had the great good fortune to discover early on that I really stink at designing, at architectural design, and just managed to find myself being a structural engineer, which put me in the greatest place to work on with more architects on more beautiful buildings than I ever would have dreamed of if I'd become an architect.
Yeah.
It's just like I hit it out of the park.
Yeah, I get like jealous of you guys with that. It's
true.
You figured it out.
Yeah, I totally figured it out. I snowed you guys. Right?
and those are just the best. You guys are just the best engineers to work with. The wannabe architects, that
Yeah.
don't say no all the time.
Well, I've had several architects tell me that just the professions are simpatico, the Italian word, which is we just they're tightly aligned, right?
Yeah.
One touches the other, and we in a really kind of intimate, close way. Like every move we make affects every move you make. It's not like a layer that you're adding on. So we're naturally aligned.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing I think is really exciting about working together is if we're on our game, we're actually, not just helping the architect achieve their vision. We're actually, because we know more about it than they do, we're giving them new options that they maybe didn't think of before.
Yeah.
For doing something, maybe achieving the goal in a better way or a unique way. Because, theoretically, we're the experts on, the Newtonian laws and that kind of stuff. And so when we're doing great, we're actually opening minds and opening options.
Right. Yeah. That's the best when you get that relationship and not just let's do this. Okay, yeah, do this, and then you come back and like, well, couldn't we have done it this way? Oh yeah, you can do it that way too. Well, why didn't you tell me that? I don't know what I'm talking about. But
it was one of the first jobs I was up with John Carney, who's the CNCLV up in Jackson Hole, 25, almost 30 years ago. I went up there to work on a project with him, and that was in Evergreen, actually. So that's why I was traveling up there. And it dawned on him that their structural consultant should know more about structures than he does, right? And so he asked if I'd be willing to fly up there every so often and work on their projects. And it also dawned on me that I should also know more about structures than the architect. And so a light bulb went off, that our value is in being a trusted advisor and a consultant and an aid to the design process, not a checkbox or a requirement,
Yeah.
And that's really informed our work over the years is, we are seen as a force behind the project, not a hindrance to it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, to spring off of that, so our very first client was John Carney.
Really?
And John Carney called me last week. I'm driving, and I always answer the phone when it's John Carney. And the nature of his call was, I'm working on a house, and I just don't want to do the same thing over again. I need some fresh ideas. I need some fresh energy. Like, go for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was really the nature of the call, and it's just quite an honor to have an architect tell you, let her rip, make this something better than what we've done. Right.
Right.
So,
and it's really a thing to you guys, right? I mean, and to get to that trusted point of being trusted and having a relationship and like where you're continually striving and
super enjoyable too, like really brings a lot of satisfaction.
We tell young engineers a lot that I know you learned how to do calculations, right? But you're relationship building now, not just because that's a good way to connect to the next job, but it's because that's where a lot of the work enjoyment comes from. I mean, working with, we have a million John Carney stories. We don't want to make the whole thing about John Carney, but I mean, Brant and I would go up there together and we'd end up at John's house for dinner, right? And Brand would be running around in his socks playing sock hockey with his, with his kid, and I'd be helping cooking dinner. And then after dinner, the trace paper would come out, and we'd just start getting to work. And you watch those kids grow up and get married, and it's a lifetime thing. It's really cool.
Yeah. So yeah, you talked about the sort of like first client there, but let's talk kind of further back. So Brant, where did you grow up? Where do you kind of come from?
I grew up in Colorado Springs and Black Forest.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and actually, when I was in, I went to CU for engineering because that's what the aptitude test in high school said I should go into. So I went into electrical engineering, and that just wasn't for me. You couldn't see anything. You couldn't put your hands on things. And so I went into structures pretty quickly. And the other reason for that was my best friend growing up knew from the get-go that he wanted to be an architect. And 6, 7 years old.
John Carney.
No. His name's Hansel Baumann. He was the...
Sounds like an architect name.
Yeah, great name. Baumann means build in German.
Oh, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
And he recently was the campus architect at Gallaudet in Washington, D.C. He lives in Washington, D.C. now. But anyway, when we were in freshmen in college, he had a contact with a builder in Monument, and we would design houses for this builder because he would build these houses. And so I got into the design of these houses and immediately saw that there was talent involved and that I didn't have it. And so felt like my contribution to the industry was with structures and not architecture. But one of our first projects that we did together with Greg and I went to college together. And we did an office building in Monument that is so ugly. We call it the office building.
As they're covering it.
Yeah, exactly. And Greg and another graduate student who had a license did the structure for it. So this would have been back in 1982 or so, 83.
Yeah.
And
building's still there.
Yeah,
I'll have to check it out. I'm going there tomorrow. My in-laws live in Black Forest. We go all the time.
That's Yeah, it was a great place growing up. And then I went to CU, came out of CU, the economy was terrible, and went to California. And part of the unique founding of our company, actually, is that the 4 main founders came from completely different backgrounds. So I really came from a forensic engineering background. I worked for Failure Analysis Associates, which was the largest forensic engineer in the country at the time. Greg came out of academia. He has a PhD. He was going to go into academia, and somehow I talked him out of it. Showed him pictures of a truss that Harry Teague was designing, and
he showed him pictures of real things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then our championship engineer founder was a guy named Greg Luth. He's the L in KL&A, and he came out of the largest structural engineer in the country at the time was a firm called Gillum and Associates, and they were the engineers of record on the Hyatt Regency when it had the collapse, and they spun off the Tabor Center from that. He was a young engineer at the time, and they spun off the Tabor Center, and he came to Colorado to do the Tabor Center. I met him in California at Failure Analysis Associates when I was moving back because I was having children in the 90s. He said, "Hey, do you want to start something up? We could start something together. I know 2 architects in the Rocky Mountains. I know John Carney, and I know Harry Teague." And so I said, "Sure, I'll try that."
It's like good, 2 good guys.
Those were our 2 first guys.
Yeah.
And so I was working, multiple jobs out here, trying to start a firm. It's not the easiest. And Greg had come back after his PhD and was working for a consulting firm in Boulder. And I kept showing him pictures of what I was working on because I knew that he was not cut out for academia, that he should be designing buildings. And sure enough, after a few months and some grappa.
I folded, yes.
Yeah, right. Some grappa. He came over. We had a huge pay cut to do consulting engineering. And then our 4th founder is a guy named Doug Rutledge, who actually ran Rutledge Steel, which was a large steel fabricating company in Loveland. So our founders were a consulting engineer, a fabricator, academic, and a forensic engineer. And so we approached the whole thing from a completely different perspective, which was, these different perspectives, research, how do things actually fail? It's not because things are too small. That's not why things fail. Mm-hmm. They usually fail because they're not thought of at all. And then the manufacturing part with Doug Rutledge, and then Greg Luth was a championship structural, still is a championship structural engineer. And so we started the firm with the idea of doing construction and design at the same time, and that's really been a transformational mindset for us, that we are not only designing, but we're also building. And currently we have about 120 people, and 30 of them are involved with design build of steel structures. The other 80 of us are consulting structural engineers, engineer of record kind of stuff. And it's now a kind of accepted. When we first started, no one had heard of it, and we had a hard time doing any of it because everyone was like, why would I have the engineer build the steel structure? You got, which is a great question. It's not an unfair question.
I mean, who knows it better than the guys that are drawing it?
Well, Doug Rutledge knows it better.
Right.
So he was really the impetus. And so, we currently, for example, have a steel detailing.
Interesting, though, I will just jump in, though, that Doug was trained as a structural engineer.
Oh, for sure.
And so he went to school as a structural engineer, but he elected not to get a license because he thought that would be that would get in the way. It would be a liability as a steel fabricator, right? And I think he was right about that, right? And so all of us were trained as structural engineers. We just went 4 different directions, right?
Totally.
Until we came back together.
Yeah. So what was that like? Getting to get. I want to get Greg's side of the story, see if it matches first. But like getting back to the sort of foundation of the firm. What was that sort of time period? Did you start spearheading at Brant and like getting some of the other guys together, and you got Greg on, and like was that a 2-year period, 4-year period that you were talking, or did it all move pretty fast and then?
Really fast.
Well, let me start with the beginning, and then Greg can jump in when he jumps in, which is that when I moved back to Colorado, Greg Luth and I had a deal, since we're in the nuts and bolts of this. We had a deal that we would do consulting as our firm, and half the money we made would go into the bank, and the other half we'd get a keep because we needed to live. Yeah. And once we got to $35,000, this was 1994, then we'd open an office. And he was in California, so he opened an office in California, and I opened one in Golden. And so it took about a year of saying, okay, we're going to start something. We did this half and half thing, and in October of 1994, I had my $25,000, and we opened a small office in Golden. And that's when I really started leaning on Greg to come join us. Because before that, it was a nightmare of long hours and long hours.
Yeah, and what was that like? I mean, so you were essentially working remotely back in 1994? Were you working?
Yeah. He was working in his house, and I will share a memory from my point of view of Brant working in his house. So this is the day where, computers were actually pretty old school back then, right? There were towers that there was no such thing as a laptop, right? And the tower sat on the ground, and he'd be talking to me either about an engineering problem. I didn't work for him, but he'd call me up, and he was just baiting me, right, with stuff. And then there'd be this, you'd hear a door open and close, and then you would hear kids screaming. His son was like 1.5 or 2, right? He was 2. And you'd hear this bum, 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 bum upstairs, and Brant would be like, wait, I gotta, hang on, I gotta save all my drawing, because Phil loved to run in and push the reset button, because it had a red light by it, and
remember the reset button?
Oh, yeah.
so there was
just saved it to the cloud,
no
problem.
No problem. No cloud.
Yeah. So it was, that part was difficult. Working out of the house was not fun. I'm still a PTSD about remote working from that experience,
But even like working from the house, but working with somebody across the country, like were you guys dialed in were you talking every day and working on the same projects, or was it pretty kind of separated?
We were working on different projects, but were essentially bailing each other out, and so there was a lot of a lot of plane travel,
Train wrecks,
train wrecks and plane travel, and then we had this new invention called the fax,
nice.
which opened our minds to how we could communicate with each other.
Yeah,
and our fax was one of those old thermal imaging faxes. So it would come out in a roll, and you'd stretch it out to flatten it out, and you'd accidentally put it in the sun, and it would turn completely black. And so you'd have to call back and say, "Please send me that fax again because I left it in the sun."
The sun erased it.
Yeah.
So
That's funny.
So now,
All right, great. Yeah. So now, where are you coming from?
dial back. So I grew up in a Navy family, and so I think they still make you move a lot, but we moved a lot, right? Every couple of years, pretty much, or every year for a while. So I lived up and down the East Coast, and pretty much every Navy town there is. Washington, D.C., where I was born, Norfolk, Virginia, Charleston, South Carolina, Mobile, Alabama, Newport, Rhode Island, and then a brief stint in California, where we lived in Monterey and Carmel. And ended up in Virginia Beach, where I went to high school. But I'd lived in some really, really nice places like Carmel and Newport, where great architecture abound, and Virginia Beach, where it absolutely does not. And so there was a really clear thing to me how important architectural environment was to at least my happiness and my understanding of the world.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, A, I have to be in a beautiful place, and B, and I have to create beautiful things. And I had been told since I was a kid, oh, you're going to be an architect someday, right? Because I played with Legos, right? And back when Legos, there was bricks and doors and windows. Those were your choices, right?
Yeah. Now Legos come in like a 2-foot size one piece. Everything, right?
Right. There was no Star Wars paraphernalia or anything like that. It was pretty much pure imagination, and pretty rectilinear for that matter. But anyway, so then I knew somewhere along the line, my brother who went to Penn State said, hey, you're good in math. There's this great program called architectural engineering. You can be both, right? I was like, oh, that's what I want to be. So I applied to only places that had architectural engineering and ended up choosing CU in Boulder instead of Penn State, and came out here to be an architectural engineer, and that's what I got my undergrad in. And like when I first came over the hill into Boulder, I was just like, Mom, Dad, I hope you like this trip because I am never leaving this place, and it's pretty much true. Right?
I was going to ask you, like, how'd you land here? But that'll do it. Yeah.
They drove me out multiple days, and I was just like, okay, I've just arrived in heaven, and I never changed my mind, right? So, that was really that was pretty formative. And then, interesting, the architectural engineering program had a really nice. Interleaving with what was then environmental design in that school. And so we had to take some design studios and architectural history and tangent. We took architectural history from a guy that completely faked his credentials. He lied his way into the position. He had no credentials whatsoever, but he taught an excellent class in architectural history. Yeah, he was really good. But he ended up getting booted out. He had no bona fides.
He found a textbook one day and read it.
I don't know. Yeah. But then there was also a design studio, which is where I learned definitively that I had no talent, right? Because at least with a clean sheet of paper, there was nothing there. And as it happened, right around that time, the guy that lived next door to me in the dorm was this guy named Hansel Baumann, whose name you might have heard before.
There you go. Yeah.
Right?
Famous.
So right. So a connection was made, right? And also Hansel is a person of enormous talent, right? So he was a really inspirational character, even as a really young person. And so then I kind of sunk my teeth into engineering, and then I got a part-time job with this small consulting firm in Boulder, and for summers, in a time when it was really, really hard to find work. I went to every structural engineering firm, including SOM in downtown Denver, trying to find an internship. Couldn't find anything, and these guys looked like they were the weakest, and pummel them into giving me a job. So I just nagged and nagged.
You
and
just
nagged.
took after your history professor.
Yeah.
Had this amazing resume.
Exactly. Finally, I annoyed them to the point of they're like, all right, you can work there. Geez, we'll make up something for you to do. And they convinced me that I really needed to go on and get a master's degree. And so I did that, and I had gone through all of school at the same time with Brant, but we were like planets orbiting, or moons, or different moons on a planet. We didn't really interact that much.
Just orbiting around Hans.
Yeah, Hansel. Yeah,
I was hanging out at the environmental design school because it was way more fun than the engineering school.
Yeah, and but then we became really close friends in grad school, and it was like a 2-year program, and we were there at a time there was just a bunch of remarkable, brilliant students that were there. So the bar suddenly seemed really high. You're like, oh, you have to be this smart to be a structural engineer. We worked it, and we also had a really, really good time. We would hang out in Brant's cabin that was down in Divide, his family's cabin, and we made a great adventure out of it. And so that's when then we graduated from there, and that's when the economy was so horrific. I kept working at that little firm in Boulder.
In fact, he cajoled them into hiring me with a master's degree at $7 an hour to do some research for him or something like that.
He was like helping to catalog their library of masonry research books and do sweep up the shop. And we were really grateful for it.
Yeah.
And then I worked there until 1989, and then they kept trying to talk me into getting a PhD, and I wasn't really interested.
What was that? What was that company?
Atkinson, Nolan and Associates.
Okay.
So they're still a small company. They still exist. They're there, and
still experts in
masonry. In masonry, right? And that's what I started out to be. I did research for NSF, and that's where the academic thing kicked in, and I was working on a bunch of little projects. Jim Nolan was then coordinating a project between the U.S. and Japan on seismic design of masonry buildings, and it was going to be a 6-year-long program. And it started with testing little things, bricks and mortar, and then little assemblies and bigger things and walls, and it was coordinated with universities all around the country. And I got to know all the people in all the universities that were doing this work, and I had done the first project. And the culminating project came up, which was a 5-story full-scale test on a full-scale building subjected to earthquake loads at a new lab that had just been built for this test at UC San Diego. And finally, I was like, well, that looks like fun. So I thought, well, I'm gonna go, right? It was, for me, it was the thing was, I didn't want to get a PhD the reason my boss wanted me to, which was, it was the union card to get NSF funding, right?
Yeah. I was wondering what. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was sort of the business model, right? He's like, you need a union card to be able to run this business, right, someday. And but I wanted to do it because I wanted to do it, if you know what I mean. I wanted the experience of doing that thing. And UC San Diego was just an amazing, amazing place. And really, really smart, brilliant, worldwide engineers that were there. Nigel Priestley was my hero. He's a brilliant New Zealand earthquake engineer. And I met all these great people, including a guy that had been visiting from Italy, who was a brilliant professor from there. And he said, Gregorio, when you are finished here, come to Italy, we will pay you something. And so
$8 an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much actually. Yeah, it was pretty much like that, but it was like survival, wages. But so I did a postdoc work in Italy, and then
working on the same sort of.
Actually, it was a full scale 2-story test of an unreinforced masonry building. So it was modeling a historic building. So I generated a lot of experimental work on large full scale tests. So that was cool, and again, met all these wonderful people, learned a little bit of Italian, learned mostly how to swear in Italian, and then...
Where were you at?
In Pavia.
Yeah.
It's just south of Milan, north of Genoa.
Is that the oldest university in
It is.
the world?
Listen to you. Wow. Yeah. Actually, I think they fight over with Bologna.
Which one that sounds right.
Yeah. It was, and again, that one I was only there for like 6 months, but it might have been the most intense, wonderful 6 months of my life. And it was, then it came back with the idea that I would take over this firm. I could, become I was the chosen guy. And then we had just a really wild year. It was 1994, and Jim Nolan, I arrived in September, and in December, Jim up and died. He had a pulmonary embolism, and it was just kind of out of nowhere, and suddenly he was gone.
In his 50s or
60s? He was
yeah.
in his 60s. And then his partner, Hank Atkinson, who was the only other guy there, passed away that July. Okay? Wow. And all this thing that I was supposed to be taking over suddenly was falling apart all around me. There was one other guy there, Mike Schuler, and the two of us had been going to take it over, and I decided, because Brant was, simultaneously, the parallel stories, Brant's like, come over here, look at this beautiful.
Look at this truss.
Yeah, look at this truss, right? Yeah, right. Yeah, let me introduce you here at Teague. Is this cool or what, right? And
you forgot to mention that you also brought a couple of cases of grappa back.
Indeed.
And that was the lubricant.
That does lubricate things.
I did have to live in his house, right? I didn't have to, but I didn't have any place to live, right? When I came back from Italy, and he lived in Arvada somewhere, and he said, yeah, you can sleep in my basement. I ended up being there a couple of months or something like that. And I had brought back 8 bottles of grappa, because I loved grappa. Oh yeah, and it had just come clinking with me off the airplane. Anything to declare? No, don't worry about it.
It's mine.
Yeah. And my experience with grappa was that everyone thought it tasted like kerosene, and they hated it, and I loved it. And at one point, Brant and his wife Lori had been so nice to me. I thought I should be kind and say, would you like to try my grappa? And it's going to be such a waste, because they're going to spit it out, and they won't like it, and I will have I've lost 2 glorious glasses of grappa. The worst thing in the world happened. They
liked it.
So my whole store that was going to last me years was gone.
They figured out how to charge you rent.
Yeah.
I don't think it lasted your stay.
No, it didn't. It was gone inside before I left their house. Right. So we had a good time. But anyway, so I made the transition from the Boulder firm, which was an enormous change, right? Because my whole path from sort of to research, academia, egg-headedness, and Brant was like, "Aren't you tired of writing about buildings? Don't you want to build one?" And that the trust that he mentions from Harry is key. It's one of the first things he's ever worked on, right?
Yeah, and he took so long to design this truss, right? It's a PhD thesis on a statically determinate truss.
What do you want? It took forever.
Still have it on your wall.
I do. I poured my heart into it, right? And because it was one of those things, the fax machine had yielded a sketch from Harry, just a hand sketch. This is kind of what I wanted to look like, right? And so I went after it. And then I don't remember where it was built, but it was locally. It was local in Denver, or whatever the place was.
Where it was manufactured.
Where it was manufactured.
Yeah, it was for the Aspen Institute for Physics, but it was manufactured in Denver.
In Denver, and Brant took me out to look at it being manufactured, and that was the moment. That's why there was no phones back then. We had film. You might have heard of it. And we would take, and to get the whole picture of the truss, I had to take 8 pictures over the whole length of the truss, and I taped them together and put them on my wall, and I still have it because that was the moment when I was just like, oh my God, it looks just like I drew it.
Yeah.
And the fabricators were like, what did you think it was going to look like? Right?
No, it's real.
Yeah,
don't you understand? Yeah, we know we do this all day. I get it. Yeah.
It was a big deal.
The other part of the truss was Harry's idea was that he wanted to show the force flow through the truss with the way the connections were designed, but also he wanted all the member sizes to be exactly the size for the force in it, so that they get bigger where the forces are larger and they get smaller where they're smaller. Because he wanted the physicists who are thinking about really out there stuff to, while they're bored in a lecture, to look up at the ceiling and say, well, why is that one bigger than that one? What's that about? And what's this going on? And so that's where we also connected with this idea of working as a partner with the architect to achieve something more that either one of us could achieve separately.
Yeah. Did you throw in any like slightly fatter members just to mess with them? And like, why would that one be?
Oh, that's a great idea.
than-
We did not.
Yeah.
We did not.
That was
That's
very
a great
nice.
idea.
Level.
Though.
I was too,
We
yeah,
would
I was too
today, for
naive.
sure.
Yeah, exactly. That's a whole different level.
That would happen today.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good thinking. Put a big fat one right in there. Yeah.
So yeah, what are some of those other relationships with architects? So I mean, well, it's okay. So you had, let's start. So the firm, you have 4 of you. You had like pretty diverse kind of backgrounds and sort of like built for a large firm. It seemed like from the kind of foundations.
Yeah.
How long did it take for you to all kind of grow into those roles? You know, those like bigger firm roles versus all of you, drawing each trust yourself and having no employees and.
It took 2 decades.
Yeah.
Seriously, because of the horsepower of Greg Luth and Doug Rutledge especially, we got involved in, one of the first projects Greg worked on was a sign in Las Vegas. The Hilton sign in Las Vegas had collapsed in a windstorm, had folded over. And the joke there is that the people who saw it fall over in the windstorm thought it was like a ride and that it would pop back up, and do it again the next day.
Just waiting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the project came in through the old firm failure analysis because it was a failure analysis. And in that project, we got the design for redesigning the new sign. And because they didn't want to be without a sign, the new sign was straddling the old sign. And had to be built around the old sign. And we're talking, the new sign was 270 feet tall, so a 20-story building. And the old sign was about 100 feet tall. And
100 feet. The old one, well, with what was left of it, it was 360 feet tall.
Wow.
Wow. And we had designed one that was 360 feet tall as well. And they decided that they couldn't afford it. It cost too much because whatever.
It wasn't going to fall down.
Well, it was. We used to joke about it because someone decided that $16 million was too much to pay for a sign, but $12 million was okay, right? And so we just started hacking off stories until we got down to $12 million. And it's the ugliest project and one of the largest that we've ever worked on. It's enormous, but I don't ever tell anybody.
No.
Except the whole world now that we've been on our podcast.
Yeah.
And another project we did about that same time was if you've ever driven on I-80 through Nebraska toward Omaha, there's a monument, archway monument there in Kearney, Nebraska. It's called the Great Platte River Road Archway Monument. And it's a monument or museum to the fact that so many people traveled through there, the Western migration. The first Transcontinental Highway goes through there. The Transcontinental Railroad goes right there. I-80 is the most traveled east-west interstate.
Ironically, nobody stopped there.
No, I personally haven't even been in. I haven't been in since it's been finished.
But I mean, the pioneers didn't stop there either.
No,
Right? They just kept going.
It's a monument passing through Nebraska.
We see it.
Yeah.
And so the 300-foot span bridge was actually built in the cornfield next to the highway. And then one evening, and we actually filled a bus with our 30 employees and drove up there for the evening, for the overnight. They put it on some movers and closed the highway for 6 hours and drove it across very slowly, set it on its abutments, reopened the highway. And, we're 3 years into our company at this point, right? So we were doing these kind of, what I would call big league projects. Right. And the thing about big league projects is you don't have to do like 12 of them to really get it. You need to do 1 or 2 of them, and you got it. You understand what it takes to do that kind of project.
Yeah.
So we were lucked out. Really.
Well, we lucked out in the sense that we got something that most people starting out in a firm don't get, which was, first of all, we got these enormous projects. There was like 3 or 4 things, that were of that size that happened really early on that we had no business doing, right? But we did them.
Again, learning from that history professor.
Yeah, exactly. I'd never seen that thread going through, but now you've brought it to light. Actually, that's a whole new perspective.
I don't think that's going to go on the website.
Okay. Fake it till you make it. But we have, but what it did though was give us a sense of confidence around what we could do. Right. Yeah. Suddenly you're like, well, Brant did the bridge, right? And he could say, look, I just designed a 300-foot span, 2-story building and drove it across the highway at night. And it doesn't look like anything anyone's ever done before in history, So what's next, right? I can pretty much do whatever you want, right? And it gave us a sense of confidence and courage and just confidence.
Yeah. Well, there has to be something too about just having 4 founders that are roughly the same experience and age or whatever, right? Of like that gives you so much of a horsepower, right? But then it's also a lot of cooks starting up a company.
One correction, we were not the same age.
No?
Yeah,
Okay.
they were 15 years older than that, maybe.
Okay.
So, in fact, about 8 years after the founding, there was kind of a schism, different ideas about the way to go forward. And we joked that our parents got a divorce, and suddenly Greg and I were thrust into the leadership of the company. And Greg became the CEO, and I became the CFO in name only, because we had no idea what we were doing. And so that was another tumultuous time. But, a lot of it was learning by doing, learning by doing.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I'll just add, because people say, I'm often introduced as the K of KL&A, right? But now your listeners will know the real story. The K was a really brilliant professor at Stanford University named Helmut Krauwinkler, originally from Austria. Brilliant guy, very, in academic circles, very famous. And so he became a part of our company. He'd worked with Greg Luth. Greg Luth got his PhD under Helmut. And so he was a part of the company. We originally we called ourselves the Structural Design Collaborative, which I really dug. It was kind of like the Gropius thing.
Yeah.
And it didn't have anyone's name in it, right? Totally dug that. But these 2 really big brainiacs decided they needed to have their names on the firm, right? So it became Krauwinkler, Luth and Associates. And then...
So the L, my last name starts with L.
Right.
And so everyone thinks it's us. It's us, but it's not us. So we're sharing this.
You guys are dropping so many bombs on this podcast. It's, hot take.
Exactly. But we never have the courage to change the name. No. Mostly because Brent has stupid ideas for what the name should be, that we couldn't, So we stuck with that. But Helmut sort of left early. He didn't really have the stomach for structural design. He was really a true academic. And then we had this kind of more of a rough divorce when Greg Luth split off from us, which is really sad because he's a brilliant and extraordinarily talented individual. But the way we're running the business didn't really align. And so he split off to California. And, we thought maybe we'd lose Doug in there as well. But the 3 of us stuck together, me and Brent and Doug, and we were sort of the leaders of the firm, at that point going forward. So that was a moment. That was 2003.
Yeah. Then to answer your question from about 20 minutes ago, about 5 years ago, we had grown to 60 or 70 by then, and Doug was slowing down, thinking of retiring, and suddenly Greg and I were running a 60-person firm, and it was too much. Our heads were blown off. What happens when you're running a 60-person firm with 2 of you is every problem floats to your desk, right? Or to your awareness. And so you spend your whole life solving problems and not enjoying why you were doing it in the first place. So in 2018 or 19, we reorganized and we brought on an executive group and brought 6 other people up with us. And so now we're trying to
all from within the firm, by the way.
Yeah, so now we're trying to learn what does it look like to run an actual 100-person firm. And we're still learning about that. But one of the powers we have is we have 16 principals in our group, and every one of them, with the exception of one who's been with us 10 years, grew up with the firm. So we have a really strong trust relationship. We have a strong ability to do things and make changes and initiate things. And it's our power is that there's this really committed, strong core to the company.
Yeah. Just that speaks a lot to culture, right? To have people stick around that long. And was that, sitting around with the four of you in the beginning, was there a lot of talk about what's the culture of this place going to be, and what's the vision of it, and is it what it has become now? That idea of the firm, or has it really morphed?
I think yes.
I think it's the same.
Yeah.
Like one of the reasons we started working together was we wanted to enjoy ourselves, and we wanted to have enjoy our work, enjoy the people we were working with. And it's not that we weren't in our other jobs. It's just that we wanted that autonomy. We talk a lot about autonomy as a important factor for satisfaction for a knowledge worker, or design professional, for sure. That autonomy is really important. And so that is the thread that has gone through the process. So we have an office in Carbondale because a couple of folks, we were doing work with Teague and other folks in the Roaring Fork Valley, and a couple of folks were like, I'd like to live up there. Well, yeah, let's do it. Let's open an office there. And so that attitude, I think, has really helped. We do surveys, and we've been voted, one of the top 10 structural engineering firms to work for in the country by Zwag-Wide.
Since 2006.
Since 2006. It's like, that's not valuable in and of itself, other than that it's a sign of continuation of concept and value. So we feel like, making money, that sort of thing, is a result of doing the right thing and doing it well and enjoying yourself. If we do all that right, we'll make some money.
There's many other aspects to our culture too. I mean, as Brant said, we started out with an idea for what our firm would be that was different from every other firm. Brant's fond of saying Denver didn't need another structural engineering firm. I mean, I don't know if you know, but if you go from Martin was originally founded as KKB&A, Ketchen, Kunkel, blah blah, it goes all the way back. And then and Milo Ketchum is sort of like the great grandfather of all the structural engineers and in the area, right? Even though Martin has claim to him, right? But he spun off a really rich heritage of engineering here. And the town didn't need another one, but we had a different idea about how it would work, what it would look like. And we were coming at it from this non-traditional way, a forensic engineer, an egghead, and a fabricator. That notion of thinking, well, we're different from everybody else, also is a thread that has gone through, right? We don't feel like we have to be like everybody else. In fact, there's a kind of we're required to be a little bit different, right, than everybody else in order. So the culture of everyone says they're innovators and so on, but the culture of really thinking of new ideas, thinking of better ways to get things done, has really carried us through. Enjoying your work, and part of that is being innovative and being at the top of your game, and it's really worked.
The other really major aspect that we got directly from both Greg and Doug Rutledge, Greg Luth and Doug Rutledge, was this idea of leaning into the project and not waiting to be asked questions, not like trying to hide from liability, for example, but lifting your head up out of the foxhole, look around, see what needs to be done, and insert yourself into the process. Because bluntly, through Greg's experience with the Hyatt Regency, bad stuff happens, and we have a social obligation.
Given your age, do you know the Hyatt Regency?
Right.
It's the worst
city. Yeah, that's right. The collapse of the bridges. Okay.
Right. Worst disaster structual disaster in the history of the United States.
Yeah.
And
I don't know what film is, but I know what that is.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you know what faxes are?
No, I'll have to. We'll Google all this.
I'll Google it. I'll send you a picture.
We'll put definitions in the show notes for everybody else.
Anyway, carry on.
I was just saying. So when what I observed sitting in meetings with Greg Luth working on some giant project. And he's arguing with the mechanical engineer about how the ductwork should be passing through this, and I'm like, but it's none of our business, right? And he just showed me how, and clients loved him because they knew he was looking out for them, and he was looking out for them. We really learned how to do engineering from Greg.
And another story that we use to communicate the culture to the younger engineers about engaging with architects is to say, well, ask them what color it is, right? Because like, why should I even care, right?
Right. Yeah.
But if you know what color it is, then you'll have an insight into what the architect's trying to do, what they're trying to achieve. And they don't just, even though this is your big deal to span from A to B, that's not what they're thinking about. They're thinking about the building in a whole with a whole different language, including what color it is, right?
Right.
And so if you get in their minds and really try to understand, then you can do a better job. So
yeah, I love that. But going beyond your scope or your normal scope, and so what's a project that stands out for you guys in terms of like how you're different, where you were able to really move forward with that idea of innovation, and we're like top of your game.
It's just a 2-hour program.
Well, I would go with the Aspen Art Museum to start with.
Yeah,
That's an unbelievable project.
Right.
That again, we probably shouldn't share all the public information about that project.
Well,
because it is out there.
Yeah.
We had a conversation with CCY about that, and they said, let's keep that off, so we can edit this again if you want. But
seriously, this art museum, from a structural perspective, is out.
Well, let me put that put that in a parking lot for a minute and talk about. I'm going to go to another Aspen project, the music tent that's up there. It was really formative, right? And it just connects to what we were talking about just a minute ago, right? And so,
so my design team, I'm the engineer of record of the Aspen music tent, and my design team was Greg and Doug Rutledge. Those were my.
Because that was pretty early on, right?
So I had a pretty, I didn't have to do too much managing on that project.
But I mean, set the stage about what was happening with the old tent was designed by Eero Saarinen, right? And no, actually, we'd gone. Before, it was.
It was the other Bauhaus
guy. It was Saarinen,
yeah.
And then who's the other Bauhaus guy? His name.
We'll splice his name right
in.
Yeah.
Splice in his name. You know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And we had to. They had the last concert of the season. Aspen, as you know, is in the mountains. Herbert Bayer.
Yeah.
Herbert Bayer. So we had to then disassemble Herbert Bayer's tent because we're going to build a new tent on exactly the same site. And
the original tent was Saarinen's.
The original tent was Saarinen.
Then there was a Bayer permanent tent.
And now then there's a Teague tent, right? And
No
by the way,
pressure.
the Harris Concert Hall, also that by Harry Teague, which is their indoor concert hall, was designed by Harry Teague and Greg Luth before our firm had started. That was another seminal project for us. So of course we're going to design the project.
I worked on that project using AutoCAD 8, I think the version 8 of AutoCAD.
So
I learned it.
But we had to close it down and build the whole new structure, and they already had the scheduled concert for the springtime, right? So there was no messing around, right?
Wow.
We had to succeed. We had to build the whole building in one winter season, right?
Did you guys build the steel for that project? Were you building it?
We didn't at that time. It was 2000, so the acceptance of that was pretty early, but we did the detailing. We did the steel detailing of the building, which was really...
Other things popped up as well that we talk about an integrated mindset. There was needs on the project. Like there's 4 columns in the building. There's a story there too. We're like, we're great engineers. We can give you no columns. And they're like, no, Bayer's tent had columns. Saarinen's tent had columns. The people of Aspen want columns in this spot. We're like,
but he wanted them. Harry wanted them as small as possible. Right. So the columns in that building are 10-inch solid round steel. Columns at the bottom, solid. I have a little slice in my office that sits there, weighs 40 pounds, about this.
And then they get bigger as they go, but they're literally on ball bearings, great big ball bearings, top and bottom, because the whole tent moves.
Wow.
Right around, so fundamentally unstable, right? So we gave the contractor some guidance and help and designed an erection, a bracing system during erection. But my favorite add-on was the vent cones. Tell them about the vent cones.
Oh yeah, so at the top of each column, the idea was to have a cone that could lift up and vent the tent if it got stuffed
Opened up
in
like
inside.
a ladybug, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sitting in a meeting and the pricing came back for these vent cones at like $100,000 each for 4 of them. And the project architect, John Backman, who was one of my favorite, he's in India building the U.S. Embassy in Delhi right now. He said, I can't believe these vent cones cost more than a luxury automobile. That's ridiculous. And so Doug, who was in that meeting, said, I'll do it. We'll build them. We'll build them. And sure enough, he got his dad, who started the fabricating plant, but was now 80 years old. They hired a fiberglasser. They built a frame. They
In the garage behind our office in London.
behind our office, they built these 4 vent cones and hauled them up and installed them.
And you did it for $90,000 each, and
I think it was around 60.
Yeah, that's more like still.
But that was our first real design build job, actually.
Yeah.
The other thing that was great about that project that I learned, we're only 4 or 5 years into our business then, but that project had a spirit on it. It had an owner who was really committed to the project. Shaw was the builder, and they had their best superintendent on the project, who actually, the plan of the building is effectively round. And so the superintendent would have a music stand at the 0, coordinate in the center of it with his drawings on this music stand. Like he's the conductor of this whole operation, and I would be coordinating with some mason on some wall, and inevitably we'd stand back and we'd say, isn't this a great project? What a great project to work on. And it just had that vibe.
After it was done, they had an open house for all the people that had been, building it and their families. And you could just listen as everyone went around, whether it was the guy that did the wood stuff on the stage or the molding or the drywalling, whoever you were listening, whoever was talking to his family, they were going, look at what I did on my project. Look at this is my building, right? Yeah. Everybody had this ownership. Like, I'm so proud of this. It was fantastic.
A great story from that project that is all about this idea of relationship and the thread and the and the meaning of community, I would say, is that the original seating for the music tent, it's molded plywood seats, and they have these cast aluminum frames that the molded plywood sits on. And when they first installed them, they had their first concert, which was like Mahler's Ninth, which uses the most space of any piece, and so it had the full choir, it had the full 100 and some piece orchestra, but the seats were too high because the shorter people in the audience, their feet were dangling. And the mythical story, whether this is true or not, I don't really know, to be honest with you, but Harry Teague is a huge, tall human being, right? And the story is that he sat on the bench and said, yeah, this is great, and it turns out it was not great. So they remade all the aluminum stands, the cast aluminum stands, and for a while in Harry's office, there's all these stands.
I was going to say he got hundreds of seats.
Yeah. So one time I'm working up there, and he said, I got 10 of these stands for a guy in Denver, and would you mind delivering them to him? And I'm like, sure. And he gave me the guy's card, and it was Mickey Zeppelin of Zeppelin Development. Right, yeah. And so I went to Mickey's office. This is 2001 or so. And he's out in the middle of what is now Taxi, but he's in the original Taxi building with 9 acres of empty space, like out in the middle of nowhere. And I pull up with these stands and I give them to him, and he said, oh, hey, would you mind looking at, he has a radio tower in that building, that is not functional, but needed structural, the City of Denver wanted a certification that this tower was okay. So I started doing that, and sure enough, we did Taxi 2, we did Flight and Freight, and the hotel, the Source Hotel, and a whole bunch of really fun stuff. And then we got Dina involved, who's a friend of ours from Jackson Hole.
Oh, wasn't he your first guest ever?
One of them,
Yeah. He's a great story too, because I didn't realize this, but I'm doing projects with Steve in Jackson Hole. And he is such a staunch modernist that he's struggling, and now if you go to Jackson Hole, all you see is modern work, right? Yeah. He's truly a pioneer up there. But we were doing some amazing stuff together.
Yeah, but he was like hitting his head on the wall for 5 years until he got modern project up there. Yeah,
It was
Totally.
and he stuck to his guns. He's my definition of it. Just like, this is what I do. This is how I do it. This is my, this is the level of quality and design that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And please don't ask me to put a log in anything.
Yeah.
But we got him connected to the Zeppelins. I mean, it's just this community.
Wow.
It's just this community.
You guys are just master connectors.
Yeah.
Well,
Your first 2 clients, then your third client is
We used
Mickey
to play the game of the 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
But it was Carney and Teague. We would just say whatever you just pick a client, and we'd say, okay, let's trace the family tree, and how far does it have to go to get back to one of those 2? And most of them, it's maybe not less. It's less true now after whatever 27 years. But for
we
the
probably can't connect like Plato.
Maybe. But
cool.
Brian Como,
Yeah,
then John Carney. It's a fast connect.
There
right?
you go.
So
The Kevin Bacon of architecture.
exactly, that's basically what it is. How far do I have to go to get back to Carney or Teague? And so you're like, we work with another one that you interviewed, is Sarah Broughton, for Roland Broughton, right? She started out working for Harry Teague, right? And so we met her there, and we're like, "Whoa, you're going to be a star. You're going to take over this firm." And she's like, "No, I'm going to. I'll do my own thing."
See it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So
That's a good example.
So there's lots of those connections.
And that's what's so cool about what you guys do and how you do it with architects, where you get to work with different people and get to sample things. And that's like why one of the reasons I started this podcast, because there's not too much of a reason for me to be able to talk with Harry Teague or Sarah Broughton, and it's like, I want to work with those guys. I want to see it. And
Right.
I've done a pretty good job of changing firms about every year and trying to work for everybody, but can't really do that. But
I did look you up on LinkedIn and saw that you've been.
it's a little long.
Yeah. For sure.
But yeah, that's actually been a blessing. But also you realize there's lots of different kinds of architects out there.
Right. Yeah.
And some are fun to work with, and some aren't. As you might imagine, right?
The thing a lot of people don't realize is that as a consultant, our young engineers, our fees, we work on probably 8 times the number of projects that an equivalent architect work on, because they have so much more scope to deal with. So 5 years in, our young engineers have worked on 50, 60 projects, where a young architect may have only worked on 6 or 8 projects.
Right. Yeah.
And so you really do get this wealth and breadth of experience if you're paying attention. If you're, it's been great.
Yeah. So what do you guys get excited about with the future and thinking about what's next?
There's a lot. It's funny. I've kind of I'll speak for myself. There's a lot of aspects of that. One is we're getting to this point where we can actually see the end of our engagement in this firm from here, right? I'm not going to work there until I'm 80, right? And there's a whole lot of really awesome young principals that are coming up that are itching to run the firm, and we're anxious to let them do it, right? And so there's a certain amount of excitement just internally around the idea of we've always wanted to be a legacy firm. And speaking honestly, Brant and I really are kind of the second generation, given that Doug and Greg were somewhat older. But to turn it over wholeheartedly to the third generation and watch what they can do with it is pretty exciting.
And you just have to make sure they have the right initials to take over. Just curious.
That's the thing that we're struggling with right now.
You can take over. I'm going to need you to change your name.
Because my thought on name changing is that the reason we haven't changed our name is you have to be famous enough. Like if Google changes its name to Alphabet, everyone knows that. But if KL&A changes its name to Flange or whatever, they're like, well, what happened to KL&A? Who's this new firm in town, right? Yeah. And so we haven't changed it because we're still working on building the brand.
Built that up so long, right? Yeah.
The other thing that I think is really unique about us is we started widespread ownership from almost the very beginning. Starting in 2000, we had 8 owners at that time. We only had 15 people in the company. Today we have about 110 employees, and 68 of them are owners of the company. We offer ownership within 2 to 3 years for a person who's, player, let's say, for lack of a better word. And so that has allowed us to have this principal group that's been around, because they've been owners for a decade before they become a principal of the firm. And that gives us this excitement for the legacy firm. We're not just saying a legacy firm as 2 people who own the company. We're saying we're a legacy firm as 2 of 67 people who own the company. And honestly, I think I can speak for Greg as well, as low as it was 5 years ago when everything was our problem. I'm more excited now about the future than ever. Greg is doing some amazing groundbreaking work in embodied carbon and mass timber and all that kind of stuff. So, and then I think the other place that's exciting that seems less easy to point at as innovation is the way we run a firm, which is we're trying to deliver that same experience to our staff that we experience. This autonomy, we call it autonomy, mastery, and purpose. It's a Simon Sinek mantra for a knowledge worker. For a knowledge worker to be satisfied, they have to have autonomy, mastery of the work they do, and a purpose for doing the work. And we're trying to deliver that to the younger staff, to everyone, as a business model, basically. And to the extent we're successful in that, it makes it a great place to work and a great place for people to spend a career. It doesn't fit everyone. We're not 100% successful with it. But that's the innovation in terms of the business model. It's not a machine where cogs come in and cogs go out.
Yeah. Well, it's got to take a lot of trust and a lot of sort of that mid-level leadership to be able to offer as many people as you can that autonomy, right, and that trust to them. And
I won't name any names, but we've seen a number of architectural firms that haven't either thought about it as deeply as we have or haven't bought into it in the way that we have, and they want to sort of maintain ownership, right, all the way to the end, and then you get to the end and you're like, okay, who's got $1 million wants to buy my firm? Answer, no one, right? And
what do I get for that? I get some old computers and
exactly, right, and some blue sky, right? And so whereas one of the things that we've done that Doug taught us, to be honest, is if you want to build that, you have to share in the wealth, right? You can't keep it all for yourself, and that's why we have 68 owners who all get a portion of the profits that we make and participate in the shareholder meetings and help drive decisions of the company. And having been willing to give that up has created this wealth, and by that I mean culture, not just financial wealth. It's been fine financially; we do fine, but the culture is rich.
Yeah.
So, since Brant mentioned it, though, I can't not mention my excitement about our ability to, as engineers, to influence sustainability. Finally, after all these years, when everyone is trying to do LEED and net zero buildings, and you're like, come on, we're gonna have an exciting kickoff meeting, and you'd be like, yeah, let's go, and then you'd be like, we can use some fly ash like we normally do in every building anyway. Yeah. How about that? That'd be innovative, right?
We could paint our steel green.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Ask me what color it is.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. We can. It's green, right? We can make up some stories about how green stuff is, But now suddenly there's some real math behind the sense of urgency that we have to change the carbon footprint of our buildings, and suddenly come to realize that the footprint, because of how well architects have done and mechanical engineers and the whole building industry to drive operational carbon to near zero, which is amazing. I think you guys, and by you guys I mean your whole profession, have done the most amazing thing over the last 30 years to drive that down. But all it did was then shine the spotlight that we haven't done anything, right? And so the operational carbon is tiny compared to the embodied carbon over almost the whole building life at this point.
Right, yeah.
Right. So thanks to your good work, suddenly it's on us now to have an impact in a hurry faster than we ever have before, right? And it's pretty much all our stuff. Most of it is in the structure, right? There's some in the building envelope and things like that as well, but we have a big piece of it and an enormous responsibility. And we've taken it really, really seriously. We started a whole team we call Team Carbon and at KL&A that is wholly focused on this problem. And it kind of, in a sense, it grew out of a little bit out of the mass timber work, which started earlier than that. But, if you hang around mass timber people long enough, you're going to hear the embodied carbon story over and over, or the sequestered carbon story over and over. So that's clearly a really big tool in our belt. So those things are really exciting. I mean, the amount of work that we're getting in both of those areas is just accelerating exponentially because of the need, because of interest, and it's really exciting to have done the homework and put the work in since 2009. Well, we've been building the heavy timber building since your first job ever with John Carney with heavy timber building, but to get into the mass timber as we know it today is the building that we're in. We've done the homework, and it's paying off, and everyone in the firm is really excited by it.
Yeah.
So this column that you think is wood colored is actually colored green. It just looks wood colored.
We're knocking on this column behind us, this wood column.
Mass timber column.
Yeah.
I want to point out to you, if you can see that it's laminated in two directions. I'm going to nerd out for a minute.
Yeah.
It's all made of 1x2s. I mean, this is all made of trees that were smaller than 9 inches in diameter, fast growth trees in northern Quebec. So, so this is, from a sustainably managed forest. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Get out of the way.
No, you're supposed to be in the picture.
In fact, every member in this building is made from these 1x2 pieces of wood.
It's all made from smaller
fast
stuff.
Growing, sustainably harvested material.
Like all the building in this building, I don't know the real number, but it's so small it doesn't even matter, right? Well, and the firm that built this makes this material is called Nordic, and they have a forest in Shigeru, which is Quebecian for where the moose go to mate. It's way, way north.
That's just what they tell Americans.
Yeah.
Totally.
Right. That's what they told
bought
me.
that, didn't you?
Tell everybody. Yeah, that's what it means.
That's what they told me. But we flew up there, right? And it's just forest, and they own this chunk of it. And in their own forest, they regrow, all the wood that's in this building really in the matter of a couple of days, at the most.
Really?
Yeah. It's just a couple of days to regenerate. It looks like it's just solid that wood with over, but this amount of volume of timber is nothing compared to what they grow.
Huh.
So it's just it's a speck.
Yeah.
So,
it seems to just make so much sense, and it's great that it's like coming here. Buildings are being built, and like more and more interest, and
So that's one of the things I'm excited about in the future. That's just growing like crazy.
Yeah. Well, again, just thanks for coming on here and talking to a young guy here who doesn't even know what film is, and has no reason to talk to you guys normally. But I've worked on a few projects with KL&A, and you just seem like you're the gold standard, and it's great to hear this sort of insight into the firm of how that, especially like where I'm at, of thinking about sort of projecting firm culture years beyond when it's only two people twiddling our thumbs in our living rooms, and thinking about how that actually can come to fruition, and in that sense of good culture, and just how how into architecture and the overall picture you are is inspiring. So thanks for coming on and sharing the story.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure. It's been really great.
Really enjoyed it.
You can visit architecting.com, that's architect-ing.com, to see images from this week's guest.
And please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.
Have a great week and keep connecting.
Hi, I'm Eli. This show is made by my mom and dad and these people.
Heidi Mendoza.
Aaron Best.
Kyle Bruner.
Emily Childs.
Trevor Notsko.
Zach Huff. Rob Cleary. All right, let's get a coffee. See ya.
Cool. All right, now we just hang out.
Okay.
Now the pressure's off.
God,
Now you can say whatever you want. Yeah.
In your own adventure, I have some insights because I've listened to so many of your podcasts. Not all of them, but certainly everyone that's a client of ours, I've heard. I think, but I know that you've started your own firm, and my own advice is pick your first partner carefully. Like the measure of our success, not to get all choked up here, but it's because we picked each other, right? Or he picked me, he wooed me, right? I was the one that really made it all work. But
because we actually needed an engineer in the company.
Because
we're an engineering company.
Yeah. But our talents are yin yang kind of talents, right?
Yeah.
Brant is someone that gets stuff done. He gets stuff done in a hurry. He's been a visionary since the beginning. He knows where we're going, and the minute he thinks about it, he starts working on it. And I'm a guy that sits back and scratches my head a little bit and thinks it all the way through. I'm kind of the detail guy. For a long time, I described myself as the Eeyore of the group. I was just like the one guy who was like, "Oh, that'll never work." You know?
Need more comments.
Yeah. Exactly. I never was like that way, but not in terms of the engineering, but in terms of how to run the business. Like, we should hire 10 more people. I'm like, oh, that's going to be hard, right?
Yeah.
Brant's like, come on, let's just do it, right? We used to sit in Woody's Pizza going, someday we could be, I don't know, huge, like 6. I mean, like 6. I'll get out of here, right? That's,
that's too many.
That's 3 times as big as we are, right? There's no way.
That's how I feel right now. 3 sounds like a lot.
Yeah. But pick carefully, because your next hire will have everything to do with how it goes. I think that matters.
Was that pretty apparent, like right on? That your differences. Like I find, like with me and my partner, he's extremely talented, and we kind of picked each other for that. And then then the things we're doing, it's all pretty much the same, and so we're having troubles kind of like identifying lanes and like kind of figuring out like, how are we not just overlapping, and what are your skills and my skills, and what for you? Did you guys go through that as well?
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, there's a lot of chaos involved. I mean, just a lot of. I think.
And when we started, we had no lanes. We were both for a very short period of time. We would work on the same projects together, and then it became pretty clear that I'm not going to say that. I mean, it was always a joy. It was really fun. But let's just say we didn't have to. We had enough work that I could do my own thing, and Brant could do his own thing, and pretty quickly we had a third and a fourth, in the office. So things sort of split up a little bit, But there was always sort of transitions. Brant built all the relationships up in Jackson, and he kind of introduced me to everybody up there, and then there was sort of a slow change over time, and then pretty soon I noticed I was going to Jackson more than he was, and that's since happened to another generation and another generation after that in terms of who's managing those clients. But we did the same thing for a long time. It wasn't until 2003 that we said, you're the CFO. And then that was, again, as Brant said, in name only until we figured it out. And it wasn't until like 2019 that we're like, all right, let's get serious. Here's what the CFO does. Here's what our chief of, business operations does. Here's what our chief of construction operations, chief of engineering operations. They all now have like lanes. Yeah. Right.
So I just have to wait 25 years.
Yeah, and then it'll be fine.
No, but the idea of role definition, I think, is we could have done that sooner.
But well, there's roles, but there's also the part that when I started talking about it, was really about our work styles, the kind of people that we are. And we've put a certain amount of energy into that too, going back to when did we first attend impact management, and they use the DISC system of work style or personality style kind of thing, and strength finders, those kinds of. We find that kind of work is really important to really dig into. I mean, to get personal and dig into like what makes you tick.
Yeah.
I mean, to do that
an
early.
example of that is that, Greg is a creative, which means that he's very detail oriented, and he needs time to think about what he's doing. And I'm more of a thinker, an idea guy. And so what I learned quickly is I was spouting all these ideas, and after a while people were like, enough with the freaking ideas, like let's get something, so I've learned over the years that I need to wait till it's a really good idea, and then I need to do the work to know how to implement it before I'm able to roll it out. Because I'm thinking out loud with these ideas, and these guys are like, that's too much noise.
For like a detail-oriented person, you're trying to figure everything out as you're saying it, and
And on the other hand, we got this project, going the other direction, we got this art museum in Aspen that is the most technically challenging project. I mean, I worked on the Archway Monument and these kind of things, but the technical challenge in that building, which doesn't look like it when you're in it, is out of this world. And this was in 2014.
It was finished in 2014.
So we decided our CEO needed to buckle down and focus on that project. So he stopped being the CEO for a while because we needed that detail-oriented big brain on that project, or we were going to be in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
And he flew to Switzerland and worked with Swiss engineers on it. And
flew to Paris to meet with Shigeru and all those.
In fact, it transcends. Like it so transcends building code concept that the city of Aspen was finally like, you just tell us if it's okay or not. We trust that your stamp means that you think it's okay, because we can't check it. There's no way to check that building.
I'm here to tell you it would never have gotten built in Denver, ever. Or any other respectable city, right? That actually has.
But it would
I'm not trying to bash the Aspen Building Department, but in fact they were like, we've been working with you since 1995.
Right.
We know you, Greg. If you say it works, then we say it works, right?
Yeah.
But there ain't nothing in any code about it.
So that's I would not have been successful on that project at all. So it's a example of just respecting what people's strengths are and trying to build your roles and your company to utilize strengths and not offset weakness.
Right. Yeah.
That's the hard part, right? Because we all have weaknesses, and we like to focus on them, and we like to be annoyed by other people's weaknesses. And if you can get over that and focus on strengths and maybe hire into the weaknesses, that I think has been a really positive thing for us.
Yeah.
All that is
also
like
we're
advice.
really good friends, and we trust each other implicitly, and that's huge. That's like through thick and thin. We're in fact, when we saw the troubles when our parents were fighting a lot, we looked at each other and said, we need jobs, right? So we started running our business in Golden as if it was going to be a separate company, and started thinking about marketing and how do we do this, and it helped us sort of become
grown-ups.
Yeah, exactly. And it never came to that. We've always stayed. Greg Luth split off in California, but we kept all the Colorado operations together, and so that never happened. But thinking about that definitely helped us. And so there's this trust level that we've struggled recently with, are we too aligned and close in order to have a successful transition to the next generation? Because there's still a lot of decisions where the next generation's looking to us and saying, what do you guys want us to do, and we'll do it, or what do you think? And we've really come to the conclusion that it's a strength of our company that we're such good friends and that we get along so well and we're complementary, and we're not going to mess that up just because there's an idea that's too enclosed, right?
Right.
We're conscious that it's difficult to get into this niche or this clique of Greg and Brant. We're conscious that we're doing our best to be inclusive, but also not dilute the power of that clique, if that makes sense. It's hard to describe it.
But it also has to be, if most of the people have been there essentially from the beginnings of their career, there's those other relationships that have grown over 10, 15, 20 years, right? That
Yeah.
Brant and Greg's, but
That's true.
Yeah,
Well, it's
and-
true, and
and-
they've developed within the firm that way.
And honestly, because they know Greg's looking out for them, right? They know their CEO has their best interests at heart. And he does. And so they trust him to do the right thing for the company and for the staff, you know.
But
I mean, he's a really well-liked leader of our organization.
keep going.
I'll keep going. Now I can't. You can't stop me normally. Now I can't think of anything to say. Right? You want to say keep going?
It's because I'm kissing your butt.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's interesting, this notion of this old friendship though. But it's again, I think both of us have our own ways of being really annoying, both to one another and also to the other people in the company. But the level of trust that we have is such that you're like, oh yeah, that's that thing Brant does, but you know, here's this enormous strength that I mean, actually, Brant gave the best example of it is, you know, ideating like crazy all over the place until those of us that just can't think that fast, we'd just be going, you know, I don't know, I can't deal with this anymore. Everyone else is freaking out, right? But but I totally roll with it now. I'm like, oh yeah, that's Brant doing the Brant thing.
Then you also realize that if you look at it from a strength-based approach, is that people need to bring those strengths to the team because they're not prevalent in other people. So if I think futuristically, naturally, and no one else does, then I need to bring that skill in. I'm not detail-oriented, so I need to bring other people in to be detail-oriented because that's their strength. So people bring their strengths to make a whole. Is a really powerful concept.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think we're like struggling, or it's mostly me, of like, I did the smart thing of partnering up with somebody who's better than me,
Yeah.
but then not getting,
Hey, me too.
but not getting scared or whatever that of his strengths, you know, of
Totally.
of like, man, I suck at detail. I'm not detail oriented. I'm not, and it's like, oh no, that's his. Yeah. Take it, and that's why I partnered with you.
Right.
And there's, you know, I don't know. There's so many differences though too. The act of design and architecture is such a deeply personal thing and very emotionally, you know, connected.
Yeah.
Right. So you're wrestling around in mud that we can just like, yeah, we're gonna walk around that. Yeah.
We're in here on the edge until you're done. With the mud.
Right.
Yeah. Can you wash off before you come over here?
Right, like, phew.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I mean, don't give us a blank sheet of paper. We'll freak.
Yeah. I can't deal with that.
Not interested.
Yeah.
But I know how to react.
Give us a problem to solve or a way to help, or that's what we love to do. It's a service. I mean, it's not dissimilar to architecture because you're also a service or industry, right?
Right.
But we're only a service industry in a way. Mm-hmm. Like the product is intangible. The value is intangible, and so you know the meaning in the work has to be there. You have to feel it. You really have to. You can't see it. Although I take that back because we're sitting in an example of it, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we're sitting in an example of this is why it's so great to be in this industry. Is this kind of thing? This kind of thing.
Yeah.
This kind of thing.
He's waving to both of us.
Yeah. I mean, the relationships are phenomenal. This is the most satisfying career, I think. I mean, not structural engineering, but building buildings. Being in our industry is just inherently a really satisfying thing to do.
Yeah.
I always remember a moment when I was used to spend a lot of time in CLB's office in Jackson, and at one point we were sitting around a conference table like this, and everyone was grousing about something. I don't know what. We were all in a mood, right? And Eric Logan came in. He's now like the senior partner, and he looked around and he's like, guys, hello, what we do is fun. Yeah, you know, and he just really browbeat us. He was like, who gets to do this? Who gets to draw pictures and turn it into reality? Who gets to make people, you know, I mean, he just lectured us. But for me, I didn't have to hear anything past what we do is fun.
Right.
You know, because it is.
We saw your question about did we ever think of leaving the industry? And it's like, no.
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 Yeah.
Honestly, no.
I was gonna ask about that because like it seems like in this position of where I'm interviewing some people who have become principals or whatever, and they get to that spot and then they're like, I don't get to do what I love anymore. You know, I'm just managing, I'm not doing it. And so they're at the point where they're trying to figure out how to get back to what they love and how to kind of step back. It seems like you guys did that maybe kind of more in 2018, 19 with that. But did it get to a big point where you weren't really able to be doing the sort of engineering and the hands-on stuff that...
Definitely.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I
totally can too.
I can totally relate to that. There's no question that that's a thing. That's a very real thing. But at the same time, there's other layers of things happening. First of all, like you hired, you know, your partner is someone smarter than you. Well, that's how I feel about most of the people that we've hired underneath us, right? And they'll come to me and say, "Oh, I'd like your ideas on this analysis," and I'm like, on the outside, I'm going, "No, did you consider rolling shear over here?" And in my mind, I'm going, "Oh my God, I can't believe how beautiful this analysis. I could never have done that, right? You know, you're so talented." And then, so there's that, and then there's also, and this is going to sound cheesy, but it's actually joyful, you know, for me to create a place for other people to flourish. I mean, it's actually fundamentally rewarding in and of itself. I mean, it's different than designing buildings, but it's fundamentally rewarding. And I don't have any children, so I can't use up those emotions on my kids. So the young engineers are the ones that I'm just like, you go, man, go. And it's
well, it's a whole other design problem, right? Like every day of how do you design this firm or business or
You know, and when we had two experiences in the last 24 hours. That one was we were at Meow Wolf yesterday because the steel industry was having, they call it Steel Day, and they had an event at Meow Wolf, and we were the structural engineers on Meow Wolf, and we presented
and builders.
And
we were going to meet there, but there's no quiet space.
There is no quiet space. And we were the builders of that. So there's an acknowledgement that our business model is the right model, works well. We built it, so we're presenting. Dan Craig is representing Shears Adkins.
Daniel Craig is at the
Again, famous people were there.
And I'm in the crowd with 100 people, and I was thinking, like, you know, 20 years ago, I would be standing in the crowd going, man, I wish I could have a firm that could stand up there and give talks like that, you know. And here we are standing there in the crowd, and my firm is talking up there. John Yuhan and Sean Franklin, who was the builder.
And honestly, this conversation really happened. I was telling Brant, I'm having to remind people that when we first got that project, Andy Rockmore called me directly and said, "Look, no one can do this project but you. You're the man. You're the gold standard. You're the everything." I'm like, yeah, I sure am. Yeah. And I went to meeting 1, and then I went to meeting 2, and then I said, "Hey, John, you want to work with this?" And he said, "Yeah, this is really great." They didn't need me anymore, right? So everyone that was standing up on that stage was not me, but it was equally rewarding. You know what I mean? It was extremely rewarding to have created that space.
It's funny you say that, though, because like 3 years in, you were standing in the Aspen.
You didn't
do it to wait too long.
That's true. That's true. And then the second event is that our detailing, there's a competition for where detailers, kind of like the AI awards, you know, the honor awards, those kind of things for detailing, and our detailing group won the grand concept, or the biggest award in the nation for detailers. We just heard yesterday for a museum.
For the Joslin Museum in Nebraska. I can't remember the architect right now, sorry. And they won it the previous year for Meow Wolf, and they won it the previous year for the U.S. Olympic Museum.
Wow, yeah.
Right?
So they are arguably, I think, the finest detailing group in the country for sure, maybe the world, because we're pretty good at it. And, you know, that just is amazing. Like, I'm amazed because I had nothing to do with that.
Right. It's one of those things that people talk about, like 3D modeling and running CNC machines and this amazing new world of what is it, VDC, virtual design and construction. It's got an acronym now, right? And we're like, is that what we've been doing since 1995?
Yeah, since VinCom.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
pretty sure we've been doing that for 27 years. Is it new now? It looks like it.
It has different goggles.
Yeah, it's different.
For me, the transition happened, like we all joke, but I really was the best AutoCAD operator in the company for many, many years. I was. So fast. So you'd be sitting there working. The thing I loved about AutoCAD was that you're working
Greg's
on...
pointing at himself. This is just an audio thing, so I have to narrate what's actually going on here. But
So what I loved about AutoCAD is you'd be thinking engineering thoughts, but they would show up on the screen because it was so seamless, because the work you were doing on the screen was actually the communication to the outside world. Like drawing on a piece of paper is a communication. Now when we went to Revit and started building models, there's another step to the communication to the outside world. You're building the model, and then you're taking sections of it or whatever, putting on paper, and the direct connection isn't the same, in my opinion.
yeah,
So when we transitioned, thanks to Greg's vision, quotes, air quotes, that we would be early adopters of Revit, and we were like 2012, and I'd never adopted Revit, so I lost the ability to be productive in the model space, and so that sort of forced me to become a manager of the company, to think about how we're running the company and all this stuff that is probably harder for people who still have the productive capability. Like I just didn't have the productive capability.
It's actually, it's I hadn't thought about it that way in a long time, but that was the seminal moment, because when we first started, one of the big deals that we used to tell everybody, and now it's not a big deal, was that in 1994 we were telling people we don't have a drafting department, right? Every engineer draws what they design, and we see this as a key mental connection that you can't pull apart the drawing of it and the designing of it. And we were like, here's a Post-it, do all your calculations on that Post-it while you're making it work, because that's the calculations are just to prove what you put together, right? And all of us were super proud of that, including me and Brant, who fight over who was the better CAD operator, right?
I was.
You just switched over to Revit, so you'd still be faster than him.
But I also didn't learn Revit, right? And so suddenly we were literally out of the club, right? We couldn't. Yeah. And the people in the firm were like, good, please run the firm. We need somebody to run the firm. Would you not draw details? Because it's fun drawing details.
Right.
It really is fun.
Yeah. It's such a strange profession, right? Where you start with 4 guys, you do the things you're good at. The bigger and more successful you get, the further away from doing the things that you started.
It's called the Peter Principle. There's a book that came out in the 60s or 70s. It was just like, you get promoted to the level of your incompetence, and that's where you stop. Yeah. When you finally get to the point where you really are terrible at your job, that's where you stop. So,
I mean, luckily, we found running a company or running a business, not just a business but the industry, to be very interesting. Also, it is really interesting.
Right, yeah.
It's always new and different. You're always working with different people. There are things that are interesting about the profession besides designing buildings. But
Doug used to say, "I like building things," and you're like, "Of course you do." He goes, "Like, no, I build buildings, I build businesses, I build people up, I build teams, I build vent cones in the garage, and it was all the same. Yeah. It's all the same."
It's like you're saying, like when it's sort of that design problem of, you can extrapolate it to a lot of different things, right? Of a detail, of a building, of a business, of a relationship, or
how someone's developing. How do you develop people? How do you do quality assurance? How do you do all that stuff? Are really design problems.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the other thing that's happening now with our size, though, is that you're realizing everything has to be more intentional than it had to be when you're really a young firm. Communication in the firm happens because you go, "Hey, Brant," because he's sitting 10 feet away, right? Yeah. Or even when there's a dozen people in the firm, it doesn't have to. And there's just this soup of activity, and everybody hears what's going on and participating with another, But now suddenly we're I think 120, right now, and you have to really think about what you're communicating to who and when, and who you keep in the loop and who you don't. And so it's a very, very different dynamic. And actually, I think our next generation will be way better at it than we are. We're good at the soup part and not so good at the, big corporation part.
Yeah, because it's a fact that you get. It's maybe that Peter Principle idea again, but
yeah, and the business model isn't necessarily like set up for that, right? It's like it's a service industry. I get clients, I do the work, and it's not like a true kind of business plan or a product or
Because what do you want built? Whatever you're building, I want to work on, right? That's kind of how it goes, right?
I'm good at design.
Yeah,
hire me.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We do a lot of multifamily because Denver does a lot of multifamily, and we got really good at it, and now we're, I think we're as good as anyone at mixed-use multifamily work. But it wasn't, and I think it's very satisfying work because we're housing people. It has a satisfaction. But we didn't have a strategic plan where we said, a bunch of people are going to move to Denver. Let's start doing let's get good at multifamily.
Right.
It was clients we were working with were like, we have this multifamily project. Yeah, we're going to do it. Zeppelin, for example, started doing some multifamily along with the office buildings they were doing.
Right, yeah.
Learned how to do it.
Other interesting paths through that over time. Then you start developing a consciousness of sustainability as a moral and ethical obligation. And you're like, what am I doing, right? We're putting snow melt in entire driveways, and the amount of energy they're using to make sure they don't have to shovel their driveway, could feed it, or could heat a town.
So how did you reconcile that?
I haven't yet.
Question.
I'm still a complete horror to that because some of those houses are so beautiful, right? The work we do with like CCY. Oh my God, I'm so proud of that work, and it's and they're so good at it, and it's just it's fantastic to be involved in that. But at the same time, I'm also working now on a project, to optimize like warehouse structures. I mean, I don't know what you're thinking about. I'm thinking, but the idea is to figure out how to make them out of mass timber, right? There's a cost impediment. So how can we improve the embodied carbon footprint of these giant Amazon warehouses that are being built all over the place? So so on the one hand,
he's not doing Walmart; he's doing Amazon.
Yeah, right. But both of those have some ethical issues with them, right? There's good and bad. One's really beautiful, right. One less beautiful. But and so there's all that confusion that can keep you up at night for quite. It's hard to pick the perfect project, right?
One of our slogans since the beginning of the company is "Embrace ambiguity." You need to be able to embrace ambiguity.
So there you go.
And that frustrates Igor.
Igor hates that. Tell me
whereas I love it. I love ambiguity.
Right.
I'm able to rationalize almost anything.
Yeah.
Typical engineers want to be linear. It's so crazy to watch, especially young engineers that haven't figured out how you guys think. And I haven't figured that out either. I just know it's wacko, right? And you gotta figure out, you gotta dance with the nonlinear process of it, right? And embrace it, right? And just really, really roll with it because it's how good work gets done.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Get surprised.
You get surprised, right? Well, are you on a time scale? I think you do a really great thing. Yeah. It's really, one of your questions had to do with local community. Dancing, but I think you're doing as good a thing as anyone could do right now in terms of just providing this place where we can all listen to each other talk and figure out where we grew up and what it's all about.
Yeah.
You're doing an amazing thing. It's really good.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, there's an aspect of Denver's market that is very close and very related. And I haven't worked in a lot of other markets, but I feel like it's different here where, the recent phenomena, for example, of a lot of the homegrown architecture firms are being purchased by large national firms.
Right.
Is not my favorite movement, but there's still a strong local connection in many of these major firms, and there's still some great local architectures. Atkins is a local, really.
AMD is another
AMD
one.
is another one.
hanging on tight, trying to survive.
And the consulting group is similar, where most of the consulting firms that are, successful, large and successful here in Denver are local firms that work with our, we have a strong technical reputation in Denver. It's known as a good, a good market for engineering and architecture. And it's a close community. It's really, I feel blessed that I was born here. I was raised here. I got to go to school here. I had to flee when the economy crashed in the 80s, but I came back and met, got up with Greg, and I got this thing going. We happened to be in the right time for Denver's economy, and the change of Denver from the 80s to now is just phenomenal, right? Yeah. It's an amazing place. Denver's future, my personal theory is that, I have a on my wall, I have a old Rand McNally map of the United States, and if you look at it, Denver's not even listed. Like they have, it's a map of the United States, and Denver isn't Kansas City's on there, Salt Lake's on there, St. Louis, and they're all about the same size. But if you look at the future, there's Chicago for sure, and then you go all the way to the West Coast to San Francisco, LA, great cities, Portland, Seattle. What's going to happen is Denver's going to be the one in the middle. Right. That is, the font is going to be the same size as Chicago and San Francisco, and we are heading toward being a regional powerhouse community, I believe. Yeah. And that's what the future looks like. Mm-hmm. If I'm someone your age, this is a great place to be. Yeah. If you're thinking about a 20, 30-year run.
Oh.